Michael was an ordinary man, at least on the surface. He had a boring job working as a junior editor for a publishing company in the big city, a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and a routine that was as predictable as the sun rising and setting. His friends often described him as dependable, and his colleagues considered him the type of person who would never let anyone down. But Michael wasn't always content with this predictable, boring life. There were nights when he couldn't shake a feeling of something lurking just beyond his comprehension. It started as an itch in his mind, a gnawing curiosity that grew over time. One night he found himself alone in the office, sifting through old manuscripts left behind by authors long forgotten. He came across a peculiar one, bound in dark, cracked leather. It had no title, no author's name, and the paper was yellowed and brittled with age. Something about it intrigued him, so he began to read. The story was strange, a haunting account of a man who, much like Michael, lived a life of quiet anonymity. But the man in the story, as the pages progressed, began to encounter unsettling events. Things that shouldn't have been possible. Voices in his house, shadows moving on their own. A growing sense of being watched. And then, the man discovered a manuscript with something chilling inside. The story within manuscript was about him. His own life was unfolding in the pages of that ancient manuscript. Michael felt a chill crawl up his spine as he read those words. The more he read, the more the events in the story mirrored his own experiences. He'd noticed odd things before. Objects moved, his phone would ring with numbers he didn't recognize, and he'd sometimes catch glimpses of faces in his reflection, faces that weren't his own. But he had brushed it off as stress or imagination. The manuscript made him question everything. As the hours passed, Michael couldn't stop reading. The narrative grew darker, and the author's words seemed to predict his every move. It was as if the manuscript was writing itself, feeding off his actions, guiding him toward an inevitable end. The story described how the man would eventually come face to face with the author, an encounter that would shatter his reality. And the last line was the most chilling of all. And the man, whose name was Michael, would never leave the story alive. A cold sweat drenched Michael's skin as he dropped the manuscript, the words echoing in his mind. He rushed to his phone and called a colleague, his hands shaking. But there was no answer. No one was picking up. Suddenly, he heard a knock at the door. It was quiet at first, but then louder, more insistent. Hesitant, Michael stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something had come for him. When he opened the door, no one was there. But on the floor, in front of him, lay another manuscript, this one fresh, the ink still wet. He bent down, trembling, and read the first line. Michael would open the door and find the manuscript. And in that moment, Michael knew he was no longer in control. The story had him now. As he turned around to face his office, the shadows seemed to grow deeper and the whispers grew louder. Something, or someone, was waiting in the dark corners of his mind, pulling the strings, guiding his every move. Michael, the man who had once been content with his ordinary life, was no longer just a character in his own story. He was part of someone else's, and it wasn't a story he would ever escape.